So welcome everybody. My name is Barbara Tien, and I am one of the co-founders here at Ponga. I will be your host and moderator today. I really want to thank all of you for coming in and welcome you to the second of our family history series of webinars, Discovering the Details in Your Photos, with the incomparable Lisa Lisson as our special guest. This is the second in our 3 Meet Ponga webinars. Last month, we hosted Rhonda Lauritsen of Evolog to talk about storytelling, and you can still watch that webinar on demand. Next month, we're hosting Kathy Stone of Calgary Photo Solutions in conversation with my colleague Cameron Crow to talk about photo organization, categories, and just managing those physical artifacts. If you enjoy today's program, please don't be shy about telling your friends all about it. And you can also share the link, ponga.com/events, and they too can find out all about them and see the ones that are on demand. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. This session will be recorded and we'll be emailing you a link to it shortly after the conclusion of the program. We have a very large crowd here today, so we're taking the liberty of putting everybody into a webinar format, so you're all on mute. You'll see the communications controls there in that little green outline buttons at the bottom of your Zoom window. And as we get going, we welcome your questions, your chatter. Please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A section. That's a way for us to keep an eye out for them in the flow of the conversation. And I'll also leave a little extra time at the end for Q&A. Please don't be shy about asking again if I missed a question. I've got a lot going on and I'll do my best. We have already have a live chat window going, so you can converse amongst yourselves. You're very welcome to. We're delighted to see that many of you have brought friends, and you may also recognize each other from your names and locations. Please do go ahead and address the questions into the Q&A in case we miss them. We also have some useful content for you, links and tips, and I'll be dropping those into the chat when I can do one thing at a time. I know many of you are new to Ponga, so before I introduce our guest, a little background. These last few years of the pandemic have left us with not only great feelings of loss, but also a greater appreciation for where we fit into the timeline of our own families. Our stories, history, and genealogy have become more important as we reflect back on the lives lost and, frankly, the maturity gained. The experience gives us new perspective into the daily lives, tragedies, and celebrations of the generations that came before us. Ponga is new software that uses digital images to let us connect to the moments and memories of our past with the stories, media, and digital artifacts left behind. Photography was a remarkable technology innovation 200 years ago that allowed us to capture an image and put it to paper. Old photos left behind by our parents, grandparents, and other ancestors hold hints at their lives and relationships in a way that gives us wisdom to guide us in our own. As our elders pass, we're a generation or two from losing those stories and legacies that shaped us, our values, and who we are as individuals. The Ponga service is made up of 3 key elements. First is the software, an online service that helps you capture your stories by using a unique facial organization technology to quickly and easily sort your photos for you by the people in each photo. Ponga also creates an easy way to capture and curate your stories in whatever form makes sense to you, from written tales to recorded stories, or from linked documents to interactive maps. By leveraging today's digital networks, Ponga helps you put those stories into private circulation in photos. By sharing stories in photos, it's easy and natural to crowdsource from cousins and facts and perspectives that you may never have imagined. And a real key to Ponga is that it helps you create a private, authentic environment for sharing those stories. Because let's face it, the story you tell in a living room is very different from the one you share on a microphone at the town square. Now, the second key element for the product is support. And we back it up not only with an array of onboarding services, but also live video sessions that let you make sure that you can get the most out of the software. We also offer live chat with quick response to your questions, at least I hope so. And finally, a library of articles, procedures, video courses, and more to make it fun and easy. Finally, the third element, and for this, you know what, I'm just going to drop that screen sharing. There we are. The third element is you, our community. We're delighted to be part of a growing community with subject matter experts, webinars, guest articles to give you perspective on specialized topics like social history, storytelling, and photo organization. In our growing Ponga Academy, we feature not only our own articles and videos, but also member posts with discoveries and use case we never would have come up with. We're thrilled to see this community grow, and this is what we're all about. We are here to help you with your digital photographs, artifacts, and treasures so that you can use them to unlock your story. So that's basically my little commercial. I will not subject you to a demo right now. In fact, as many of you already know, I'm usually the voice of our live Ponga chat and more than happy to walk you through a demo using your own photos yourself. You can explore on your own now at ponga.com, learn more, or just schedule a one-on-one or group call with me at ponga.com/call. Yeah, seriously, that's it. Our goals for this session today are to give you perspective and techniques to understand how to discover the details in your own pictures. We have here are some of the questions that we'll address. Why is it important to identify the age of a photograph and why that's important to your interpretation of the photograph? Here's a hint. How to get started identifying the details in a photo, even when we talk about where and when to get help. Is that a bird, a plane, or maybe just a shadow? How social history comes into all of this and what to look for. It's a construct you don't hear much about in other programs in the family history space, and we believe it pulls together some of the most meaningful interdisciplinary factors in understanding this artifact. And Lisa is one of the experts in this field. Finally, there's research techniques and workflows. Lisa's a master at this. You can collect a lot of photos, documents, notes, and artifacts along the way. And we'll talk a little bit about where and how to store them, and even in selections and images. So with that, let me introduce our very special guest today, Lisa Lisson. And I rather expect many of you already know Lisa from her many courses, articles, and live events on her blog, Are You My Cousin? At lisalisson.com. Her website is designed to help genealogy researchers around the world grow their family trees without getting overwhelmed. Through hundreds of genealogy articles, YouTube videos, and international keynotes, Lisa shares social history insights, research strategies, and how-to genealogy tutorials. And she gets very practical too. Callisto Media recently published her latest book, 100 Questions for Grandma, and you'll hear more about that in our conversations today. With the upcoming RootsTech 2023, she's offering a fun VIP genealogy intensive day. It's a cool virtual all-day event of one-on-one research with Lisa as your coach, finding those ancestors or tackling genealogy brick walls. Honestly, that sounds like a lot of fun. We'll have the link for you in the chat, lisalisson.com, VIP genealogy intensive day. So let's get on with the program. Lisa again. Welcome. Let's start this off with physical artifacts. You have a number of presentations, courses, and fabulous articles on your website that help family historians through the details to look for in their own family photos. There are clues to origins, identities, contexts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. And Barbara, I do want to say thank you so much for having me. It's always such a joy to be able to talk with you guys, but to talk about old family photos because I so love them. So one of my challenges that I often tell people is you've got to pull the old family photos out of the shoebox. I know we probably all got them somewhere stuck in a shoebox up on a top shelf in the back of the closet. Get them out. And we need to start looking at them because I'm going to challenge you to view family photographs, whether they're formal portraits hanging on a wall, whether there's kind of out of focus, blurry, candid shots that got saved for we're not really sure why, or it's the picture of the family dog. We got to pull those out because I want to treat those as a genealogy record, just like we go into the archives to choose records for our research. We choose census records and wills and deeds and court records, which I love, and tax records, another great set. But the challenge is the fact that really we don't want to overlook things that we actually already have within the family or within our own home. So we may have them, we may actually have to go search for them, but it's worth the search because of the types of information that we can find and pull out. It can tell us people's personalities. It puts context around individuals. You guys have often probably heard me talk about, if you followed me at all, the social history and being able to understand and rebuild an ancestor's life, particularly those female ancestors who are so hard to find sometimes. But, they're in the photographs. A lot of times they're the ones taking the photographs, and they did it for a reason. So we have to understand and get inside their heads behind those photographs, definitely. And so those photographs that you have in your closet absolutely are resources. Just the fact, if you can put a date to a photograph, you can put somebody in place and time. And that in itself is valuable information for you if you get nothing else out of that photograph, being able to put them in place and time. But we've got to look at the details for it. Okay, we can't just glance at them and keep on moving. We have to look at the details of those photographs, right, Barbara? Because you have that one. Do you want to share that one that you were talking about?
Let's see. There we go. That's the best I can do, I think, with the reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at first
Crazy
glance,
stuff.
yeah, show the back of it. So at first glance, what we think we might be looking at is actually, you might think like a daguerreotype or perhaps an ambrotype. It's a little hard, looking the image and stuff. But you can see this is a case. It's actually only half the case.
Exactly.
This beautiful embossed case on the back. And then when you flip it around, we have the image. Okay. And it would look, I'm going to get this a little hard for me to tell, but oh, there's my face.
Yeah.
My reflection.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Based on, I can't quite see all her hair and stuff, but I think it's probably around an 1860s picture of this woman. But if you take a closer look at this, and I actually know a little bit because Barbara told me, this is neither a daguerreotype nor an ambrotype, because when you get into the details of it, it's just a reprint that's been stuffed in the case, right, Barbara?
Exactly. My favorite little tell is if you look right here in the corner, you can see the print of the frame from the inside. He didn't take it out of the frame to take the enlarger photo. And as a fact, I happen to know that my grandfather was a very good amateur photographer, and he had a wet lab and an enlarger, an optical enlarger in his basement. So he just put the camera, put the original on the enlarger, I would assume, to take a good, what we would call a camera scan of the original picture. And frankly, I have had this in a very careful case with, acid-free paper. And I wanted to get some artifacts to pull out, and forgive me for not having properly scanned it. We can talk a little bit about that, about Zoom calls later, and using Punga as a way to talk about pictures, so you don't have to do this. But that's when I noticed all of a sudden, wait a minute, what is that? It's the side of the frame. In a frame, there's something suspect.
So we have to really pay attention to all the little details that are over there in those photographs, definitely. So Barbie, you want me to talk about how I choose the photographs that I get to use for records?
Oh, absolutely. How do you choose the photos that you're going to use for records?
And that's a good question. And I guess the answer is, I don't have a specific way, but I'm going to take you over to my Punga collection and I'm going to show you. Sometimes it's oftentimes, and I will preface it that I have a large collection of old family photographs, because when anybody cleans out an elderly relative's house, whenever somebody's moving, they all literally come to me. They will actually I've had, cabinet cards actually arrive in pieces in snail mail. They're like, we didn't think we should throw it out, but we didn't know what to do with it. Here you go. And of course, I was thrilled. But I'm going to take you over to screen share here real quick. Let me get there. There it is. All right. Are you seeing my Pongo library?
We are.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so this is just a small fraction of photographs that I have. And it's not unusual for me to pull some out like centered around a particular family member or family line. If it's, I try to keep them all within a certain location as I pull them out, spread them out on my dining room table. And I literally will just work with them and look at them and ponder them over and over and over. And that's so I start to get to really know the photographs. But as I scan through these photographs, the way I would pick something to work on initially, what I did was I would pick something like this. It would be a really formal photograph. Let me open that up. It would be a formal photograph. Okay. And you can see some of the things I've written on there on the side. Oop. There it goes. Where we talk about who Daniel Thomas is. This, I made a little note about, I think that they're at a gathering of some sort, but I was working more with the formal picture that we talk about. So I'm looking at, the family, and I'm aging the children. I happen to know, when he died, so I can predate it. He died in 1912, so I know that this is taken prior to 1912. And I'm going to go through all the steps for dating this photograph. The type of photograph, this actually was on a very thick cardboard paper. I did scan it and crop it out. I can look at his wife. I know how old she was. I know the 3 children. We have Esther here. We have her sister. Oop, come on, move away. The little girl here is the youngest girl, Katie. We have Reuben here. And we have a mother who is expecting. I was able to date this very specifically toward November of 1906 because I know when each of the children was born. So it was allowed me to be able to put this family, place, and time. Because it was 1906, I am pretty sure this is in the Ringgold area of Pittsylvania County, Virginia, and certainly the foliage behind it would support that as well. So there's a lot there that I could put there with names. I can put dates. I understand when they're born in looking at these formal ones. But then the more I got into genealogy research, the more I really wanted to uncover the story so I could really tease out what was really happening in these family relationships. I started looking more toward photographs. Let me go back. Of a much more casual look to them. Okay, kind of those candid ones, little less formal. Let me pop down here. So this is one, you guys, if you followed me, you've seen this one before, but it is a more casual photograph of these 2 women. They were best friends. It's one of the last pictures taken of my great grandmother. But it would speak to, I learned that she was left-handed. I was able to determine that she was actually expecting her 4th and last child in this photograph. And, that looking at it was taken in fall or winter. So I was able to learn a little bit about this strong bond between the women in this particular photograph.
Wow.
Did it tell me who the next generation was? No, but it told me and spoke to that they would actually even pose the fact they were writing letters to each other. It was something they loved to do. My great grandmother loved to write letters. She was a beautiful writer, actually. So it gave me that perspective there as well. But then I started getting a little more into things like, let's take a look at this one.
We have a quick question coming in
Oh,
here,
yes,
Lisa.
yes,
Catherine
yes.
Schultz asked in that last picture, do you think, wouldn't they be more warmly dressed if it was November? Or perhaps you have some insight on where the photo was taken as to how cold it might be in November.
Possibly. It's possible that one, it could have been as early as September on that particular one, but I was thinking it was later in. The thing is, it's in Southern Virginia, and I can tell you, it's not that far from where I live now, as far as probably an hour from where I live now. And well, you're in Tennessee, Catherine, I know. So, you can get very warm days. We can get 70s and 70 degrees in those days. So it's possible there, definitely. Melinda said, how did I even begin to understand who was in the photos without anything being documented on the back? That is a great answer. So let me go back for that for just a minute. We'll come back to this house here in just a second. So let's review the basics of how you determine who was in that old family photograph. And one of the first things that I tell people is I want you to understand how you came to have that photograph. What is the providence, what they call a providence of it? In other words, what's the history of that photograph? How did you get that photograph? So let me scroll down here just a second. And let me find what I was looking for. Okay, so here's one right here. This is a good one right here. So what I'm looking for when I find that is I know that this photograph came to me from my Talbot side of the family, so my father's side of the family. So right there, I know that I can eliminate half of my family tree. Okay, so I've already narrowed it down by 50%, right? And so I know it's the Talbot family. So I've got my father's line, and I am then I look at the type of photograph that it might be so that I can get a date to it. And I'm looking, this one was a thinner paper one. You can't see because of the way that I have cropped it, but perhaps as a cabinet card, it could be one of those thicker cardboard card. And the larger ones, those are called cabinet cards, and they have very specific dates for when they were created, as well as the smaller cardboard type of photograph, which is usually about a 2x3. That's going to be an earlier version of the cabinet card, and they're called carte de visite, and they have a very specific time period as well. And then, of course, what Barbara was showing us, even though it wasn't the real photograph, but the daguerreotypes and the ambrotypes, which are different. They look similar. It's easy to confuse them, but they have very specific dates as well. And so by understanding what type of card, and the easy way, guys, is I have a cheat sheet on the dates. I look them up online and for the dates, and then I can compare what mine looks like with others that are known for those time periods, and I can narrow down my dates that way.
You've got some great tips for that in your photo ID book. That's part
Yes.
of the gift that is
Yes,
for all of our participants today.
Yes, in fact, it walks you all through that completely. The other thing that I would then that I look at is going to be clothing styles, and I'll give you a tip. I am not a specialist on that. I can't just look at one and know what somebody's clothes were like or what style but I can Google things, and I use a lot of comparison things where I'll find there are photo sites websites in the book that you can go to, and it's a great way to compare. I think I've got this cabinet card. It looks like it was made about the 1880s. Let me compare it to other cabinet cards of the same time period, or to see if they match up, if the styles of clothing match up. You can Google 1880 fashions for women.
So then you're using that same kind of trigger as you did for the woman who was clearly pregnant and her young children. Young children are such a wonderful Rosetta Stone to name. So here's a family unit, and you've got your family tree. So you know when people were born, you know who's older and younger, who the little boys are and the little girls are. And pretty soon you've just got that little map of names, huh?
Exactly. And so if you can kind of assume, if you can date your photograph and you know that it was taken in and this one actually was taken in the 1940s, well then, and I know who the baby is actually, so I can tell you it was taken in 1938 actually. But if I know that, then I can say, well, if I know who the baby is, then I know that, this is not this particular cousin because that child would have been born, after the baby. Or so I can start to tease out who is who by virtue of, were they alive? Would they have been the right age for that person at that time period? So that's another way to do that. And I'll walk you through that in that book too, as well. So yeah, so that's a lot of what I do is I'm comparing, I try to get that date, and then I start thinking, okay, it's the Talbot family, it's a certain time period. Let me go to my tree, and now let me start figuring out and creating some theories. Could it be so-and-so, or could it be, is it John or is it Will? And then I'll do some research to see what else I can find out on those individuals to see were they in the right place at the right time to be in that photograph.
Yeah.
That's kind of the overview of that. And again, the book that you guys all got. We'll walk you through that step by
So
step.
how do you use that kind of knowledge together with Ponga's facial organization features?
One of the really cool things that Ponga did for me was when let me see if I can pull it up in my library. Let me go back. That when I had some photographs of people that I didn't know who they are, I still don't know who they are. I know that they were associated with a particular family line.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they were on my father's family line. I wasn't sure. This would have been one of them. This was taken in the early 1900s. You can see I have it labeled unknown, 3 men unknown. I actually did figure out who this one was eventually, but it turns out that this gentleman right here, he turns up in 2 other photographs that I didn't even realize.
Could you double click on that to zoom in on it, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, just double click on the necktie.
go.
There
Sorry.
you go.
Let me hang on. I got to get my zoom bar out of my way so I can see it better
Oh,
myself.
Zoom gets in the way.
Yeah. There we go. So I was able to determine who he was. And so I didn't know who he was. I still am not 100% sure who he is, but he ended up being in 2 other photographs that I did not recognize. Both of these 2 men showed up in other photographs. And I did not recognize the fact. So by doing that, I'm like, not only are they in 1 photograph, they're in 3 photographs. They were in my grandmother's trunk, my great grandmother's trunk. So I know that they had some importance to her, to that family line. And because there were 3 photographs, I feel sure they were cousins. And I just have a number of theories out there, and I periodically go out and try to see if I can find their descendants to find those photographs. But by identifying the fact, when Ponga did the facial recognition and showed me that I had more of them than I realized, it was like this huge aha moment that went on in my head.
Yeah.
So I'm on the trail, and I know that one day I'm going to get them done. I'll figure them out.
Yeah, it can be really exciting because I don't know about you, but I get really distracted by fashions of the day and what someone looks like. If I didn't know any better, I'd say the 2 guys on the left are the same guy. They can't be the same guy. They're in the same photo.
Right.
But the math of the geometry of the face is so much more accurate than my eyeballs are getting distracted by fashion. That I found the same kinds of things you have to discover.
It's interesting.
That
It's interesting you said that, because my theory is that these 3 are all cousins.
Well, that's thank you. They do look alike.
And the gentleman that I do know he is a cousin of my great grandmother. So I suspect that these are cousins, first cousins as well. I just have to continue to do the search for that, but I'm a lot closer than I was, and I feel really a lot more confident with the search that I had.
Fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And are you as you go through these, do you find it informs your research in a different sort of way?
Oh yes. Let me show you what I've been working on lately. This is so cool. I think it's cool anyway. Let me pull up. Okay, so I'm going to start with this photograph. Now, this is a photograph that I have in my collection. I did know who this was. It came to me and I knew immediately who it was. The gentleman here in the middle, if you guys, that is my grandfather. So I know who he is. And I did know the story is that he had pneumonia and he was in the hospital. And so he was getting better. And these are, the nurses and some other patients that were there. Now, this photograph was also in a cluster of photographs that had a number of photographs that looked like this. Now, to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily know what it was.
Now, Lisa, this is where you're amazing, because so many of us are taught to kind of pay attention to pictures of people, those formal pictures of people where, yes, you have all the family members and you can sort of see the family gathering and it tells you a lot about that. You have a vision to look into these pictures of buildings, pictures of sites that are complete mystery, and you start piecing it apart. And it's like watching a police procedural, frankly. It's just wonderful. So tell us about this picture and what you discovered.
So this is it was an interesting because because it was with other photographs, kind of a similar nature. And then again, with that photograph of my grandfather tucked in. And I did know my grandfather, so I knew a little bit about his history. And this is not a photograph that, if it were my photograph, I would never have kept it. But what this is a CCC camp, and that's Civilian Conservation Corps. It's a camp that was up, and this one was probably located in Yadkin County, North Carolina, which is the foothills of North Carolina. And these are like the barracks and the housing that they lived in. And I remember my grandfather talking about CCC camp. I just heard it as a kid. I never really paid attention. I'm sorry, Granddaddy, to that. And I just know that he learned to cook when he was in the CCC camp. But apparently it had a major impact on his life and with the friends that he made. So I started digging in a little bit more on that. And I thought, well, if he kept these photographs, this meant something to him. This was not just, oh, I got a picture, I'm going to keep it. They kept these photographs for a reason. So let me see what I put on this one. I think, so this one, I just clicked the building so I could add in this comment. But what I want to show you is the comment that I put in here. And I realized when I saw this photograph, let me see if I can make this bigger.
Command or Alt plus should do it.
Yeah, this was an old scan that I did. So what this is, I remember in somewhere in my file folders that I had forgotten I have his Civilian Conservation Corps discharge papers.
Wow.
And this tells us a lot about him. It gives me dates. It tells me he was of an exemplary good character, good moral character. It tells me he was a cook. It tells me what he looked like. Of course, I did know what he looked like, actually. It tells me he was in Yanceyville, North Carolina. And this is the page one of 2 pages. And I'm like, oh, wow. Now, I've got this, but guess what? This was his paper that he had. There are you can order the CCC, the entire file from NARA for an ancestor.
Wow.
It's a little pricey, takes a while to get, but you can order the entire file.
Wow. So NARA is the National Archives.
I'm sorry. Yes.
NARA.gov. Is that right?
Or yes. Yeah. And that's National Archives in the US. I know we have an international audience today. So yes, here in the US, you can do that. And my guess is if you found something like this, say if you were from the UK or in Canada, you likely have maybe something similar. But I have a discharge paper. Well, if I've got a discharge paper, I'm sure there's some admission papers somewhere that I need to get hold of that I can find out more. I don't have his. I have seen others. I have seen full CCC files. They have everything from, if you want to know the immunization record for your ancestor, it's there.
So this is a great example. This is a great example of connecting context and documents and bringing the actual document in. And you could have the 47-page file if you have that on a Google Drive somewhere. You can just bring that drive in linked as well. And it's like creating a little rabbit hole.
Well, it is a rabbit hole, and
curated rabbit hole.
Yeah, I remember, and I wish I could remember which genealogist told me this, but early in my research as a genealogist, when I was just starting out and going to conferences and stuff. And I remember it may have been Helen Leary out of North Carolina, but they said, whenever you find a record, the next question is, what other record could I find from this? What other record is this pointing to? In other words, if there's this discharge, okay, this is obviously pointing to an admission and a full-on file for the CCC. So it's, where else can I go? I don't ever want to leave a record until I've really questioned myself if there's something more that I can get, if that's what I'm looking for.
You also brought up an interesting point there, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, of why was this important? The older things are, we keep looking back on, the things that actually come to us. A lot does not. A lot is lost and curated and deleted and trashed. But the ones that actually come through, it's like that cigar box of possessions of an 86-year-old man. That's all there is. Every single little token in there is of great significance. And very often they're pointers to something else. And I love the way, the one thing leads to another and tells that story. A moment ago, Catherine asked also about the border in this picture. If you want to close this attached image and zoom out just a
Oh,
little bit, that's pretty meaningful too, isn't it?
yeah, that would help me date it. That would help me
So
to, if
tell
I
us
didn't
about
know.
those borders and that dating. Was that a
You
early
can use
20th
the
century
borders can
thing?
help to date. Now, because of the CCC, I mean, if you are looking at Civilian Conservation Corps, I don't remember the exact years. I do know he went in around 1934, four-ish, somewhere in that. I don't remember the exact dates of that program, but that would obviously give me that. But typically when you find borders on a photograph, whether this is more of the paper type, but if you're in those older photographs, like the cabinet cards from the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, the carte de visites, the fancier the border, the later it was. So so that's something that can be a clue. Particularly, it really helps with some of those older ones, the older antique ones that are the thicker cardboard. If they have more of an embellished
Mhm.
border, if it's a darker, different
You know,
colors, you start to see
I've
those
s-
tend to be older ones.
I've seen those carte de visite and so on, and it never dawned on me until you just mentioned this, how these borders, which I guess was like the 30s,
Mhm,
were a modernist version of those borders that were like part of the card, of part of the mount of the
mhm,
print. I have one like this with the 1932 World's Fair or something like
mhm.
that in Chicago, whatever year that was, of my mother as a small child. And with the dates right there.
Mhm. And the one thing that I didn't, I don't know if he actually took this photograph or if it was, because it was with several just kind of camp buildings. If it was something that was given to them, if it was more of a formal one that was taken, honestly, I'm not 100% sure
Yeah.
exactly that piece of it.
Anna chiming in from Sweden also
Mhm.
says that the if you can date if you have the name of the photographer, sometime that's on the back of the print.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, talk a little bit about that. Is there a
Sure.
database somewhere for looking that up?
There are a couple places to do that. So typically what she's talking about, let me see, I think I might have an example of one here in this.
Is that in your photo ID
It's
book?
in the photo ID book, and I was
Excellent.
thinking I have, let me see if I've got one. I'm
I
not
keep
sure I have the back of a photo. Um, where'd he go? Where'd he go? Where'd he
I
go?
was delighted to discover that many professional photographers just routinely uh, scan both sides of an image so they don't
Mhm.
lose the backs of the images, and then they have a
Oh, absolutely. Let me
naming
see. Oh,
technique
yeah,
to
this one
keep them
has
all
one. Hang
together.
on, let me enlarge this. So you can see
Ah, yeah.
here, it's a little faint, but it says
Uh-huh.
WGR Fraser in
Uh-huh.
Danville, Virginia. So that immediately
Yeah.
puts, this is a cabinet card, and it immediately places this photograph in Danville, Virginia. We know who took it. And so when you're at that step, you can go and look for um, the photographer. Now I'm thinking there's a site called deadfred.com,
Yeah.
and it's a wonderful site. It's kind of an orphan photo site, but yet he
Yeah.
has a lot of other information there as well. And he has a section on photographers, so you can kind of see a little bit about them.
Um,
You can find these guys in census records. I've done that before. You can find them in city directories, so you can start to, if you know that they were only um, working as a photographer in Danville, Virginia, say from 1880 to 1885, well, then you've narrowed this date for this picture down and can more
right.
accurately have a
Yeah.
theory for that baby. Um,
You
so
know,
yes, that's how you do it. Sometimes the photographers, they were basically photographers set up in the back of general stores, so it's not always possible to find them, but if you can find those larger ones, that's a great way to do it.
yeah. Now you talked a little bit about your great grandfather. Is that right? Your grandfather, your great grandfather?
Grandfather in the CCC, yeah.
Uh-huh. And how you spent some time talking with him. And now with your new book, you've talked a little bit about how to bring those stories out. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. So it's so important, in order to really understand our ancestors, to understand the social history around them, to understand how they lived, and we want to do that to make that connection to them on a personal level, but also to drive our genealogy research, because we have to understand what their motivations were and why they did what they did in order for us to be able to perhaps pursue other records that we might not have thought of looking at. We have to understand why they did the occupation that they did. Was it because they learned, to farm tobacco from their grandfather or their father, or were they more along the lines if they were cotton farmers, or maybe they were out in the Midwest doing corn? So we have to understand why they did what they did. And so if you can interview them, and you guys know I am a big proponent of interviewing your ancestors, interviewing yourself, interviewing your distant cousins, anybody who will talk to you, I want you to talk to them, basically. And I was really fortunate. So again, back to this picture of my grandfather, my cousin actually did this, but he actually at some point interviewed my grandfather and an oral history, and shared the video, the MP3 tapes. I mean, these things are like hour long. And so what I did is I have it in Google Drive, and I uploaded the story here. So again, this is him. He's in the CCC camp. He had pneumonia right after he got there. They didn't think he was going to live, actually. They were calling the family in, but he lived. And but he talks about what the CCC meant and why and how he went into the CCC. So I'm going to let it play. I will tell you guys, the audio and my is really a little muffled, but I just want to be able to give you the idea of what you can do here. So let me pop up this and see. It might take a moment for it to go. Oh, come on. There it goes. And hit play. And I'll just go forward a little bit.
From young, and of course when she got sick, there was no money much. We didn't have. It was real bad. You just.
Okay, so you can. I don't know. I know that's
But
very.
capturing, even if it's mushy, capturing the timbre, capturing the motion in their actual voices is so compelling. In some of the little goodies we have, we'll share some tips on sites you can use, even for free or very little, that allows you to upload audio and video and then have that transcribed so that you can zip up to just the right spot and play it, or play it just from where you want it to be.
It's an amazing, I listen to that, and it's, and I haven't heard it in a very, very long time. I'm like, oh my gosh, it just brings chills down my spine to hear his voice again. And, I knew my grandfather very, very well. And so, yeah, it was, but to be able to attach that, and to be able to attach the story about the CCC at this point is just an amazing. What he was saying was that it was the Depression, that they didn't have any money. His father was out of work, and that's, essentially, and his stepmother was sick, and they had nothing to eat. And that's why he would go to the farm, because his relatives who were the farmers had the food. And that's how he ended up going to CCC, because he could make money.
Wow. And, to mention your book, one of the sweet joys of this, it's such a beautiful, it's just a beautiful color, book as a gift. And most importantly, it's these prompts that you can give the book as a gift, and encourage your grandmother or aunt or grandfather to talk a little bit about things that they may have thought nobody really cares to know the answers to. And in chatting with this ahead of time, we realized that it would actually, there's a complicated dynamic in interviewing somebody, because there's the logistics of catching the pen, paper, and introducing a camera or a microphone and so on. But I believe the real secret is who they feel like they're telling the story to. And by talking about questions for grandma, the point is that when you're telling someone a generation extended, it's someone who presumably hasn't heard all the stories before and is still interested. And setting up grandma with a book to capture her stories, whether she actually writes them all longhand or just takes them as a cue ahead of time. And then put a camera in front
Yeah.
on maybe a little stand, a little tripod, or just propped up against a chair to watch her tell the stories from the book to a grandchild. Capture that on video. Then
Yeah.
you've got an artifact that you can pop into, say, YouTube, a free YouTube channel, unlisted, zip forward to just the right moment, copy the link from this time, and paste it into Ponga when she's talking about that story about the CCC camp or whatever else it might be.
Right.
Because we're so excited about that idea, we are actually making a gift of this book to all of you who purchase Ponga before Christmas, hint, hint, Christmas, to in hopes that this can be something for you as well. So you can very quickly sit with grandma and let her start telling those stories, and then turn them into an artifact that can be there to share. And when the grandchild grows up to have that American history report about the Depression, they've got a story to tell. They can reference something that's very real, and suddenly history comes alive and new insights to families. Those are the kinds of things that we refer to as tingle moments. It just tingle spines, stories make your spine tingle with the joy of the details to this. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. We have a very large group, and I'm really thrilled. I can see that many of you are reaching back, making suggestions in the chat, and it sounds like even reconnecting with each other, which is sweet joy, absolutely sweet joy. And it's really what we talk about in terms of having a private environment to be able to share family stories and connect with others who are like-minded, going through this, trading tips, which, by the way, Gloria chimes in to say there is a state park with museum that was about the CCC in South Carolina, and unit pictures were displayed. I think that's the gist of that. And you have a lot of these kinds of amazing tips that we never thought of. And just in chatting with you, Lisa, I've started digging into my own family's Quaker history from Salem, North Carolina. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, what must Lisa know? And so many of these things are just really wonderful. I wanted to open it up to anyone. I may very well have missed some questions here as they've been flying by, and I try to keep my bifocals on straight.
I know, I got that feeling. No, I was just looking at some of the comments in the chat. I'm like, wow, Margaret had 400 cabinet cards and carte de visites from her husband's family. I'm like, oh, I thought, oh, I just might be jealous.
I found a cabinet card that was passed in my family from my aunt, who scotch taped the front of it with a little note that says Shriner, somebody in Shriner's costume. I managed to peel that off, and I could not figure out who of the family members this was. I ended up putting it into a Facebook group, and turned out to be a famous Syrian immigrant that's part of a book now all about the first Syrian immigrants to the United States, and managed to be connected through the scholar to his descendants in Texas. And I was able to get them the carte de visite back. I still never did figure out what the connection was to my family, which remains in digital form now in my own family story. But those kinds of stories linked into pictures is just always so amazing.
Well, it is, because people did things for a reason, and that's the whole thing when I talk about, do you know where your ancestors shopped? Do you know where they, Jen Baldwin from Find My Past says this, if you don't know where your ancestors bought their shoes, you haven't finished researching. And again, it speaks to that, but it speaks to that level of knowing, because when the more you know about them, then you can start to recognize them in the records. So if you've got people of the same name, you recognize your ancestor because of maybe the pattern that they did. Maybe it was the neighborhood within the same town. So you start to recognize that, and you can start to predict perhaps where they might have landed or migrated to, those types of things. So that's why I'm so I get into the nitty gritty of the pictures. My guys were Southern farmers, but I can get into that and I can see what the land looked like. And so I can pretty much sure that, a certain lawn is not going to be in the mountains and farming up there, because they were much more of a sandy hill, sandy farm,
You know,
sand hills type
that's a
farm.
great example of that balance between a fact and a guess.
Mhm.
An educated guess that isn't a fact, but is a lead. And it's a lead that can send you to keep testing hypotheses.
Right.
And even, at least in my experience, even the facts aren't necessarily so
Mhm. Mhm.
with birth certificates and death certificates with
Yeah.
errors and, these kinds of things. That's a great question. And I, of course, live in the world of technology, where
Mhm.
we typically have facts that we can test and validate and so on. And I wanted to speak to a question Mia just asked:
Yeah.
does Ponga transfer metadata from existing digitized photos? This is an important technical point, and I'll be very brief and quick, and I'll be very happy to follow up with you in as much technical detail as you'd like to go, Mia. But essentially, in Ponga, what you were looking at on your screen, when you take your image file, let's say a highly curated 50 meg TIFF file with lots and lots of metadata about who everybody is, and you upload that into Ponga, what we do is we make a working copy of that image and we take your original and put it away into archival storage so nothing happens to it. And then everything that you're doing in Ponga in terms of adding sound and text and names of people is all maintained in cross-reference by pixel ranges on the image in native formats, in the text, MP3, JPEG, PNG, all those kinds of things. We don't mush the two together, because when you do that, you risk proprietary formats. We don't do that. Keep the original the way it is, add all this content in its own cross-referenced, but still native formats. So no, we aren't moving that metadata over. If you've got that image and you've got that, you want to be bringing that in. It's like flipping the picture over and looking at the information on the back. But we will absolutely protect that original image because we don't mess with it. We don't munge it. We don't do anything. So that was a really good question. I hope I've answered that for you verbally. I have some, feel free to reach out to me on our at ponga.com or explore that question in the, I think metadata should find the answer for you at ponga.com. Are there any other questions, or did you want to have any last remarks, Lisa?
Oh, well, thank you. Actually, I think what she was asking in the question, that Q&A about scanning, was that she just had a bunch that were scanned, so she didn't know the dates, or the type of that they are. And unfortunately, that happens. Sometimes we just get, a digital copy that somebody's cropped out, or something like that. And at that point, you just have to, there's really not much you can do as far as knowing the history of it. Maybe where it came from, as far as, okay, well, I got it from my dad's side of the family or my mom's side, but then you need to just move on into looking at the clothing, looking at what's in the picture, who's in the picture. At that point, I moved to fashions and hairstyles, to see if I could date it.
Two digital tricks I'll share that can be remarkably useful. One, you all probably know about Google image search. Take your image and drop it in there and find things that are like it. Oftentimes you can add words that you do know to see if you can find it. There's another one that's really more of a commercial tool that many people don't know about, called TinEye, TINEYE.com. It's a tool really for businesses trying to protect the copyrights on their images. So it does an image for image comparison. It is not looking at the EXIF data or the file checksum details. It's looking at the image itself. And it's a remarkably good, I mean, it's guaranteed to find all of those clip art that anybody's using. But it also can be a great way to find a copy of a photo that you've seen. Now that image of the carte de visite that I mentioned is in a published blog. I'll share that with you. But it's, now I would find it. If I copied that image and put it into TinEye, it would find the image. And that, by the way, is free because their goal is to find the commercial customers for them. So as one at a time, it's absolutely free and very, very useful way to find photos that have been used as part of blogs. You can find out the person that blogged about it, what do you know and where did you know it?
Mhm. Yeah, I haven't used that one, but I knew about it. I just had kind of forgotten about it. So I just
Yeah.
made a note of it to check that out too as well. But you know, I think and true guys, I really just make sure I want you to treat your photographs, whether you have one, whether you have a lot, hundreds of them, treat them as a record, just like those census records, just like those deeds, because I think hand in hand, if we put those pieces together, we're going to make more progress on building that family tree. Just remember, your ancestors were people and they did things just like you and I do things for a reason. They did things for a reason as well. They were, we're looking to see what those motivations were, and that's how we can start to find by putting
That's
all
right.
the pieces together. And that means, pulling those clues from the photos too.
The way I like to think about it is that the photographs that we've inherited are images put to paper. What we're doing with digital cameras today is taking what is in the visual field and putting it into pixels. So you can take a photograph and obviously digitize it and put it into pixels, but you can also do that with an image, with a document such as you did, and then go into the details in that document, that things that are truths and things that are fiction or evidence of something else, or take a picture of an artifact,
Mhm.
a children's art, for example.
That's a good.
That is, it may very well disintegrate. It's not going to last very long. Or things that are very valuable and precious that are very breakable.
Mhm.
There is, taking good photographs of them as artifacts and appreciating them as treasures not only allows you to carry that forward, but also share it with extended family. When families, when you lose a loved one, passing on those digital artifacts is a way to remember those pieces, even if the physical artifact only goes to one sibling, for example. So, well, I want to thank all of you. Did I miss anything in terms of questions? I think we're there.
I think we got them.
Yeah. So I will thank you all again for your rapt attention. Great questions. And engagement as we went through this. This has been an absolute delight. I'm thrilled to be able to have slipped in to be the host today, and look forward to more and more of these in the future. Do tell your friends, and thank you so much.
Thank
Ta-ta
you
for
guys.
now. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.